Bienvenue à mon bureau à Genève. Désolé que je ne peux pas être avec vous. On s'est mis d'accord que je pratiquais mon anglais avec vous pour mieux m'exprimer sur les sujets. So we start with this presentation on long-term trends in the business to set the scene for the prospects for the sector's decarbonization. I will speak about three, like I structure into three subsets my presentation. The first, a brief introduction. Imagine a James Bond movie where you first have to go through a long car race, like what happened so far, and then finally the movie starts. So I will have a little bit the story so far, the long-term trends in maritime transport. Then there's a core part of the supply chain crisis, or I should have said crisis, plural, from COVID to Ever Given, to the Red Sea, Black Sea, Panama. What does it mean and what we can learn from there also for the big challenge of the future, which is the decarbonization. And one point I want to add, and that's more for the economists among you. You said there will always be a lawyer and an economist. So for the economists to analyze and help all of us, including me, understand if there will be more volatility in future for the trends that I will explain. Let me start with the story so far. Some long-term overall, interesting positive trends. Let me start with one little video. I hope this arrives in Nantes with the Zoom transmission. The PowerPoint file I have shared with you via Dropbox, so you can share the whole file with the video afterwards with the participants. I love this video because it shows really how the container ships have overtaken the general cargo ships and how globally the dry cargo has overtaken the liquid cargo. So it's year after year after year. It's never big news. But if you look at the long-term trend, we have a very different geography of shipping today than before. Another long-term trend, which is also not in the news, but every year has seen a change, is the participation of developing countries. Here we have the share of developing countries in seaborne trade, loaded, unloaded. Loaded are the exports, if you want, unloaded the imports. And you see that in the past, the developing country, the global south, would export huge volumes, the red bar, big volumes, and import low volumes but high value, the manufactured goods. Today, the so-called developing countries, including China, Korea, Singapore, South Africa, Costa Rica, and so on, they are also participating in globalized production, also importing unloaded large volumes. Another positive trend, I don't have that many years here, but over the years, there are many indicators that show how trade facilitation, port performance, time in port has improved over the years. A third positive trend here, the data I have is only for the United States, but it's a global trend. Within logistics expenditure, in the 1980s, United States would spend more money on the inventory holding. You see the red line was above the blue line, the dot, in 1980, meaning you spent more time on depreciation, capital cost, insurance, warehousing than on actually moving goods. Today, well, I come back to today, but the long-term trend has been one of improvement. We want to spend money on moving things, on transport, and not on storing things. And another long-term trend, just as trade has gone up, emissions have also gone up, and they have continued to increase until today. The emissions per ton of cargo, per ton mile, per container, they have gone down, but because trade has grown so much, emissions have continued to go up, and the little green arrow on the right, that is what it should be from now on. So that's the story so far. And now we come to crisis, to COVID, to problems, and then you will be discussing how to decarbonize. But let's look, that was I was asked to do. Then came COVID. Container freight rate multiplied by 5. The blue line, the charter rate, by almost 9. Yeah, and I will now give you, that's again more for the economists. And the economists, I hope you will like it, and the lawyers will, I hope, also like it. That's the best explanation you will ever see about what happened during COVID in shipping. In shipping, we have a very steep demand curve, the blue line, meaning I need a big change in the freight rate to have a small change in the volume. Because I really need my iPhone for Christmas. I really need that spare part. I really need my fuel, my medical supplies. And transport is only a small part of the final price in IKEA, in Carrefour, in the shop. So that is very inelastic demand. Supply is for many years very elastic. The red line is almost flat. As long as the ship owner can cover his variable cost, he keeps offering, even if he loses money on the capital. But the moment you reach a capacity limit, it becomes very steep. What happened during COVID? First, we were staying at home. We no longer had our haircut. We no longer traveled. We no longer went to restaurants. And we ordered things. Yeah, my wife ordered a new bike to do bicycle at home. I ordered a bigger screen to see you better right now. All these things increase. The demand moves to the right. What happened with supply? Ships spent 20% longer in port due to congestions, problems, difficulties at COVID, and the supply went to the left, and freight rates went through the roof. As I said, that's the best explanation you ever see what happened during COVID in maritime transport. And it did have a bearing on prices. At a time when Paul Krugman and others were still saying, do not worry about inflation, we forecasted, we simulated that if the freight rate goes up so much, then yes, there will be some impact on global prices. And we were right. Later on, it was measured. We had inflation, and 1.5 percentage points of that consumer price increase was due to higher container freight rates. To the right, you see LDCs, SIDS, sorry about the acronyms, least developed countries, small island developing states. If you are in Kiribati or Comoros or Sao Tome, you are far away, you are small, you have imbalances, you depend more on maritime transport. They were really very strongly negatively affected. And which products were mostly affected? I told you the average increase was 1.5%. The interesting part, some products like here, the furniture, other manufacturing, 10.2% increase. Imagine a container full of white garden furniture, plastic chairs, very cheap, very low value, high volume. There, the high freight rate had a bearing on the price in IKEA, or not even IKEA, whatever, cheap furniture. The interesting part, computer, electronic, optical products, you say, well, a container that is full of $1 million of goods that are high value, full of iPhones or Nikon cameras, why would the increase in the freight rate impact the price? The thing is, this is globalized production. So before my Nikon camera is put into a container in Yokohama to reach me here in Switzerland, the chips and the lens and the package and the bits and pieces may have been moved up to 9 times the deep supply chains. So we did have an impact on prices. And what happened with logistics expenditure? We saw a change in the trend. And although transport prices increased, expenditure on inventory holding went up even more. So that was bad news. Time in port also went up, but now it is, again, we are back to normal. So we had this trend of getting a hiccup. Was it a hiccup? Was it a one-off problem? Or was it a change in the trajectory? So we thought, oh no, now we are back to before. The share of developing countries, it decreased for the first time since we look at this, since 1968. Because it was the United States and Europe that printed money and ordered more, and we had lockdown in China. But now we are back to the long-term trend. We thought, well, now in inverted commas, There comes the next crisis. There comes war in Ukraine. There comes water shortage in the Panama Canal. And then there come Houthis shooting at Indian and Filipino seafarers for idiotic reasons. Sorry about my French. Now, and then the ships, these are only big container ships here on this video by Marine Benchmark. You see like the little ants are changing their routes. And this, of course, had a big impact on a number of players. You see the decline in transits in the Suez Canal, the red line, and the decline in the transit through the Panama Canal, not quite as drastic, but a longer term. Both, the Panama is now increasing, improving again. The very latest data actually is that Panama had for a few weeks more transits than Suez, but still you see how this has an impact. Freight rates were rising again. We thought that was a one-off COVID extreme situation. No, freight rates went up again. And the distances went up again, continued. The black line is the global average. This is miles per ton of cargo or per container. So you see the green line, dry bulk, the blue line, oil. Over the years, they had been increasing more exports from, say, South America to Asia, longer distance. And then came the war in Ukraine, and Egypt had to buy grain from South America instead from Ukraine. So the green line went up even further. Russian oil no longer goes to Europe, but goes to India and China. The blue line went up. And the red line, the containers, it had a decreasing trend because you had more intra-Asian trade. So the distances were shorter for one container trade. But now, as they have to go around South Africa, that one also has gone up. Do we see nearshoring? That was a lot in the talk. Now everybody wants to buy nearer after COVID. No, we do not see nearshoring. If anything, distances are going up, as you saw. What we do see is some friendshoring, the orange line. So here some colleagues in UNCTAD's trade analysis branch, they did some very nice work. They looked at who is voting with whom, a little bit like Huntington did in the Clash of Civilizations, who are friends, who are not friends. So there's more trade among friends today than in previous years. Okay, what does this have to do with decarbonization? First, well, I was asked to give you a broader long-term picture, analysis of what has happened. One, for me, very important lesson learned is the increased volatility. Yeah, freight rates, already in the past, we had dry bulk and oil and gas, really very volatile, but ever more volatile. Now also container has been more volatile. And I think really what we have learned here from the COVID crisis is that if there is not enough capacity, like during COVID, when ships spend 20% more time in port, freight rates go through the roof. If ships spend 9% longer at sea, same effect, freight rates go up again. So this is the fear that I have for decarbonization. And as a friendly reminder, it has continued to go up. Yeah. Now, I won't go into too much detail here. That was not what I was asked to present, but many of you may know that UNCTAD has undertaken a comprehensive impact assessment of the midterm greenhouse gas reduction measures by the International Maritime Organizations. And we use data from DNV about impact on shipping. So here we just converted into a picture, to charts, what the results from DNV, Diagnostic Veritas, percentage difference to business as usual low growth scenario. You do see that in different scenarios, different options that the IMO member states are negotiating. Is it a tank to wake or well to wake? Is it a higher levy or a lower levy? Is it with or without a fee bait and so on? The forecast, the simulation by DNV is that costs will go up by about 80% by 2050. This is not nothing. This is quite a lot. And it means somewhat lower trade, somewhat lower GDP. Let's not cheat ourselves. What is interesting here is that shipping time, it's also going up, but not as much as the costs. Would be a long, interesting discussion. Who are the countries most negatively affected? In most of the scenarios, it's the least developed countries, the yellow bar. That's the impact on GDP, on the economy. So you see, if freight rates go up, that means trade goes down. That means GDP goes also down. Of course, not by that much. If freight rates go up by 80%, trade goes down by much less than 80%, but it goes somewhat down. There's deviation. And then if trade goes down, GDP goes down by 0.1, 0.2, 0.3% GDP. And very, very important, this is compared to the business as usual. GDP will go up between now and 2050. Our income, your children, my children, grandchildren, income will grow up tremendously. Depending on the scenario, double, triple, yeah, by 2050. So this reduction is not dramatic, frankly speaking, but it is not nothing. There is an increase, decrease, and least developed SIDS are more negatively affected. I come back to my beloved demand and supply curves. So let's say freight rates go up. We would have this situation here. Yeah, volume goes down a little bit because of the steep demand curve. I hope that's clear also, even for the lawyers. Okay, now, careful, pay attention, switch off your iPhones, look at the next chart. My big fear is that the uncertainty, the risk, the not knowing what will be the fuel of the future, what will be the carbon price of the future, what will be the IMO regulation of the future, will the ports invest enough, and the ports are waiting for the ship owners. Demand will continue to grow, but we will not have enough shipping port energy capacity. And as we have seen, not having enough capacity in this maritime economics, in this shape of the supply curve, the red curve, the technology, the economics of shipping can lead to higher increases in freight rates, to a worse scenario than, let me step back, click back, than this scenario. So our conclusion, or a key conclusion of our assessment, apart from the fact that SIDS and least developed countries are more negatively affected than others and they need help, that is a key message from UNCTAD. But the second message is, please decide and move fast, early, predictably, clear, so that we do not have underinvestment in shipping, so that we avoid more of these situations where a lack of capacity leads to further increases in freight rates. So to conclude, I have shared with you long-term trends, the story so far, which I hope you found interesting, and some of this might have been new. I've shared with you an explanation of supply chain crisis, how an economist describes what we observe, and then discussed with you what to learn from this for the decarbonization. Thank you very much.